All right, well, thank you all for being here this morning on this fine Tuesday morning. I hope that everyone is safe with the hurricane or tropical storm, depending on which time it may have affected you. I'm excited for this presentation this morning. The CTV has been a really wonderful resource for me during my time here at USC as a PhD student and now a PhD candidate, and I'm excited to share this presentation with you about doing using Microsoft OneNote's classroom notebooks in your classroom. So to give you guys just a little bit of an overview of what today is going to look like, I'm going to start with a very brief presentation, this presentation that I'm going through right now. And then I'm going to do a live demonstration. And as a part of this live demonstration, at the end of the live demonstration, if you registered in advance for this session, I've actually already given you access to a classroom notebook that we'll do some breakout sessions in to demonstrate doing collaborative work in a classroom notebook. And then we'll share out some ideas of ways that we thought we might be able to use this in our own classroom. And of course, we'll end with any questions and answers from anyone here in the audience. So going back just a little bit, even more basic before I get specifically talking about OneNote, when I think about what technology needs are in a learning management system, the big four that come to my mind are a way to distribute course content, some way of collecting students' assignments, a mechanism for providing feedback to students, and well as technologies to facilitate collaborative group work. I know for different people, their needs for a learning management system might be a little bit different, but I'm purposefully not including in this things like grading because that's, basic. Every LMS is going to have some kind of gradebook functionality. What I'd like to do now, though, is contrast what these steps look like in Blackboard to compare to how they look in Microsoft OneNote using the Classroom Notebook feature. Because Blackboard, even though a lot of times we kind of see it as the only show in town, it's not the only show in town. And this presentation, like I said, will be about using OneNote. So in the classes that I teach kind of a wide variety of general education, introductory geography classes. Some of them are more human-focused geography, talking about populations, demographics, migration. I also talk about some more technical aspects of geography, like introduction to geospatial technologies, privacy and surveillance. And so this aspect that I'm talking about here in a lab assignment has more to do with a technical project, but then you'd see this similar kind of work through if you were doing another type of assignment as well. So in Blackboard, if you have an assignment that you're going to give your students, and again, I'm talking about a kind of a lab assignment where maybe you have some directions and you have places in the lab where your students are supposed to put in their answers. In Blackboard, if you were to do this, you would upload your assignment to Blackboard, and this would be kind of the template document that would have maybe the directions and have the places indicated for your students to provide their answers. The students would then download the assignment from Blackboard. They would complete the assignment, typing in their own answers, perhaps putting in screenshots, or if it was an actual chemistry lab or something, that might include data tables or pictures. Then they would re-upload their assignment to Blackboard, and the instructor could provide feedback. And now with the new Blackboard Annotate features, that actually has became a lot easier to do, and it gives you more options on how to do that. Now, if you want to look at kind of this similar process, how that would be done in Microsoft OneNote, here, the instructor would distribute the assignment into the classroom notebook. And I'll explain this terminology in a minute, but essentially you create one template document and you're given the option to distribute one copy of it to everyone's individual notebook. And at this point, the students just complete their assignment. There's no need to download it because it's already in their notebook. And you can provide the feedback directly in their same assignment. And I'll show you examples of this where you can annotate either if you have like a tablet, you can draw on top of it, or you can add comments in the margins of their work as well. And you can see that we went kind of from 5 steps down to 3. The main reason we were able to do that is that the classroom notebook is all synced to the cloud. So the students' changes as an individual student are recorded and saved automatically, or if they're working on a document collaboratively, again, those are saved and they're able to see your feedback very easily within their document as well. I know in the past I've had trouble with commenting on assignments in Blackboard where my students are unaware of how to get to the comments. Now, obviously, there's some education we can do to help fix that problem, but I think when they see the comment like on their document, it makes it even easier for them to see it. So I would argue this workflow is a little bit easier from the perspective of the student and the teacher. And so I want to demonstrate a little bit of what this looks like, how it's organized. So within a classroom notebook, OneNote assumes there's kind of 3 different categories of content. They have some content that students can view, content that students edit individually, and content that students can work on and edit collaboratively. And within the notebook, which I'll show you in a minute, so it's a little bit less abstract, there's specific places for each of these types of content. So material that is view only is put into what OneNote calls the content library. And I'll show you some examples of how I use this. One of the biggest things would be for something like the syllabus. You can include your syllabus in here. Of course, you want your students to be able to view it, but you don't want them to be editing it. You also can use this for if you have examples for projects or rubrics. You could put that in this content library. The place where students can edit on things collaboratively is very appropriately named the collaboration space. And so you can create documents, as we'll do here during our breakout sessions, where either the whole class or individual groups of students within the class can work on the same documents at the same time. And lastly, you have a whole bunch of sections that are individual to the student. And like we see with the example here, each of the folders is just named with the student's name. And so let's say that within this student John Doe, we want to have a section for homework assignments and lab assignments. So how this works in Microsoft OneNote is there's another section that's called Teacher Only. And this Teacher Only section is where you, as the instructor, create your material that you're planning to distribute. So only you can see this material, but when you're ready for your students to get these individual assignments or materials, you distribute them to your students. So I could distribute my homework 1 and lab 1, and that would be placed in the students' folders. I can do the same thing the next week with homework 2 and lab 2. And of course, it's not just going to this student, it's going to every single student in your classroom when you do this. So for example, I do this in my class. I distribute my materials weekly. All of my assignments are due Friday at midnight. And so I post the next week's assignments at that same time, usually Friday evening. Don't actually stay up till midnight. And so I'm able to send the content to the students as they need it, and they each get a copy that they can edit individually. And of course, these sections here are not viewable by other students. So Doe Jane only, or Jane Doe only sees their content, and John Doe only sees his content. So this is the OneNote notebook that I made for this particular live session that I'm doing right now. And I should say that if there are ever questions, feel free to use the raise your hand feature here and Collaborate, or add things into the chat window as well. I want to give you just a little bit of a tour and kind of recap some of the things that I just said. So here are these folders at the top. You have the collaboration space, which, as I said, any students are able to view and edit. Now there's a bit of exception to that, and that's, you'll see that I created these group sections in here. And these group sections, I have organized that only specific students are able to see them. So if your first name is A through C, you're only going to see group 1. If your first name is D through H, you're only going to see 2, and so on and so forth. You have the content library, which includes content that students can view only. And then you have the teacher-only section that includes kind of the master copy, if you will, of all the individual content. And so here's an example of a module that I give my students. And so this module page is something that my students get weekly. And it includes, up at the top, a kind of an overview of the module, some objectives, and they have, here's what you're actually supposed to do. And you can see that one of the things that you can do here in OneNote is you actually can create checklists. So a student, whereas you might have just a list of, or maybe even a folder of PDF documents on your OneNote, it might be hard for the students to keep track of what they have or haven't read if they work on things from day to day. Here, the students can actually go through and they can mark what it is that they've done. And then at the bottom, I always include, here are the assignments and when they're due. So this page that I have, this example module, I have distributed this such that you, the students of this session, all have your own copy of this inside your OneNote. Or actually, I don't have it because I was going to show you how to do that. So I want you all to have your own copy of this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Class Notebook, and I'm going to click Distribute, and then I'm going to say Distribute Page. And all I have to do is tell it where to put it. I want it to go into the module folder. And it's going to start sending those pages out to all of the students. Now, as far as I'm aware, there is not a process of scheduling this. So as I mentioned before, I give my content to my students on Friday evening. So I do actually have to go and distribute it on Friday evening. I can't schedule it in advance. But now that it's distributed, I should see if I click in here, now I do have this module example. So this particular student is able to make their own edits on these check marks, for example. I've already sent out an example of a homework assignment. I sent this out last night. So I would send something like this to my student. I always make it very clear at the top when the assignment is due. Then I include my questions, and of course you can include pictures and things as well. And then when the students completed it, I sent out another example where I've included their feedback. So I give them their score at the top. I can write a short comment here. If you have a tablet, you can write on the screen like I've done with these checks and stars. And then right here in the margin is where I've given kind of the specific feedback as to why this person missed a quarter of a point on that particular question. So we can do the same thing with lab assignments as well. So here's an example of a lab that I give. So I have kind of some contextual information of the lab at the beginning. And then I have the lab assignment in the bottom. One of the things you may have noticed as you've been looking through these things I've been showing is I have these symbols that I use over on the side. This is something my students have told me that it's very helpful for them to understand what exactly they're supposed to do. So at the beginning in Module 1, one of the things that asked them to look at was this Q&A about OneNote. And if you click on this, it actually takes you to another page here in OneNote. And one of the things I describe is what all of these different symbols mean. And so I'm giving my students a guide for these symbols that I'm going to use throughout the semester. And so my students know that anytime I use this symbol, I'm asking them a question. Anytime I use this symbol, I'm telling them you need to do something here at this step. If I'm going to ask for a screenshot, they're going to see this symbol. So to add these symbols is super easy in OneNote. You'll see just in your home button where you change the font and that kind of stuff, you'll see what they call tags. And so anytime I want to add one of those tags, I can just click on it, and whatever paragraph I have my cursor at, I can add that symbol to. So of course you could do something similar to that in Word, or you probably could figure out a way to do it in Blackboard as well. But my students have said that the consistency of that is very helpful. I also will point out a really neat feature is that OneNote, of course, is integrating through Office 365. And so as an Office 365 product, it integrates with OneDrive. And so here you'll see that I tell my students they need to download this data in order to do the lab. And so what I've done is I've inserted a file, and it'll upload that file for you in OneDrive, create a shareable link, and embed that directly into your document. And so I used to create a separate section on Blackboard where my students would download these files. Now what I found is I can have the data and the document all in one place. And of course, as I said before, when a student completes this, I can give lots of feedback. It's very easy for them to insert screenshots into it as well. And as a teacher, you could keep the answer keys for these files inside your teacher-only as well. And if you have, say, a TA or a grader in your class, you actually can allow multiple people to have the teacher privileges on this notebook. So you and your TA and your grader would be able to do that process. So once your document, or once your OneNote is set up, then you can use it in all these different ways that I've shown here. And I've just barely even scratched the surface of all the things that you can use it for. I will say that I've used it in 2 different semesters. My first semester I used it was in the spring, and actually I was using it before our transition online due to COVID, and it became even more useful when we actually transitioned online. But I'd been using it before then only for the lab assignments, and then I transitioned that to basically doing everything in OneNote. And I also used it in the summer for my online class. And in my online class this summer, everything was in OneNote, everything from the readings to the exams to the labs. My Blackboard page was literally a link to my OneNote and the gradebook. There was no other content inside Blackboard. So let me show you how you go about to create your OneNote notebook through Blackboard, and I'll get to Eric's question about how you get your list of students in there. I do want to point out that I shared this notebook with you guys, not only as an example, but I also included some materials. These pages are materials that include training and information from Microsoft. And I've also shared some information that other universities have made. This is a tutorial on how to use Blackboard to create the OneNote notebook, which I'll show you here in just a minute, as well as some caveats that I'll talk about when I demonstrate it. And the University of Maryland in Baltimore County, they had a really great Q&A with a whole bunch of very kind of basic questions for OneNote. So I linked in their resources here as well. So I'm starting with, this is just my Blackboard page for my class that I'm teaching this fall. And I purposely have not made my OneNote for this class yet because I wanted to create it here to demonstrate how to do this. So in your course content, you're going to go to Tools, and you're going to click down to the OneNote class notebook. And I mentioned this, if you follow the guide from the University of Miami, in their university, it's underneath Build Content. In our university, it's underneath Tools. So just note, if you're all following the tutorial, I did make a note of that. So you're going to click OneNote class notebook. And we're going to give it a name. Classroom notebook. You probably don't want to do grading, and the reason for that is if you do grading, it'll create a single column in the gradebook, but more than likely, you're going to have multiple assignments that will each need separate columns in the gradebook. So we'll just leave evaluation turned off. I'm going to temporarily, I will change this, of course, but I'm going to make it so that my students cannot see it because I want to load it with some content before my students can see it. So I'm going to click No to not permit them to view it. And then we'll click Submit. Once we've made it, it looks like it's finished, but all this is actually right now is just a link that goes to OneNote. And when we click through it, we'll actually go through the process of actually creating it. So the first thing it's going to have you do is it's going to have you sign into OneNote, which you'll do with your university credentials. And we're going to name it. And one kind of mistake that I've made is I have so many, this is the third time I've made this now, that I need to start including the name of the section of the course and the semester I'm doing it, so I know which notebook is which. So we're going to name it. It's going to give you a little bit of information. This is the same information that I gave you just a minute ago, where the collaborations, the purpose of it is, the content library, the teacher-only space, and the individual student notebooks. So it's just kind of reminding you what it's going to do. Here's the place where you can give another teacher permission to use the notebook. As I mentioned before, if you had a TA or a grader, this would be where you'd put their information in right here. I don't have a TA in my class, so I'm going to leave this blank. And here's the option that gets to Eric's question about how you populate the roster. So you get two options here. You can automatically add the students from your LMS, But there's this caveat at the end, as they access this notebook. Or you can copy and paste your students' names or email addresses. So in my experience, I've always actually gone through and I do it the manual way. And here's the reason for that. If we do it the automatic way, remember there's this caveat at the end, as they access this notebook. And what that means is that it will not create the notebook for that student until they click the link in your Blackboard, which means that if you want to preload it, say with like your first module or your first set of assignments, when you distribute that file or that page, those students that haven't yet clicked the link won't get that information, and you actually will have to manually then copy the page and paste it into those people's that did it late, into their notebook. So what I found is easiest. It does take a little bit of time, but if you use their email address, it's faster than their name. That's amazing how many people have the same name. And so I always just put them in here. Yeah, if you have 350, I would definitely recommend doing this option. What I would do if you do this option is, and you want to make sure that the students get that content on time, is I would make them aware that they need to go sign in, and I would actually make an assignment out of it. I would say, like, for 5 points by this time, you will have signed into OneNote. Because then, let's say you get 320 of the 350, then you're only adding 30 students by hand. So my classes that I've used have always been 40 students or less. So it wasn't too difficult for me. But if you do have a really large class, I definitely recommend using this option. So it'll enroll them into your OneNote by themselves, but set some kind of deadline for your students to do that. So that way you know when you can start distributing content. Now I should point out that all the content here in the content library and the collaboration space, students who don't click through at the beginning will still see this content. But for example, when I distributed this module, and anyone that I add later who currently doesn't have access, if I add you later, I will have to manually give you this module example page because you came in after I clicked the distribute button. So that's kind of the upside and downside to doing it one of those two ways. The other thing with the class of 350 is if you downloaded your roster from like my.su.edu and you selected the column that has their username and you made that semicolon separated, I would think you actually could just paste that whole list of 350 in here. I haven't tried that, but that could also work. So that's how you put in your students' information here. And let's see if it will let me just not have any students. Okay, it will. I'm doing that for the sake of FERPA. I don't want to start typing in my roster's name and tell you who all my students are. So here it's asking you which sections do you want to give your students. Now, this is kind of important that you kind of get this right, because you're able to create new sections later, but you can't delete sections that you don't have. Or sorry, if you have a section called handouts, you can't delete it after you've created it. You can add new ones, but you can't delete them. So I'm going to delete all of these. And I'm just going to play it safe for myself. I know that I'm going to have a labs, and I know I'm going to have a study guides, and I know I'm going to have an exams. and I know I'm going to have a modules. So these are the sections that I'm going to start with for my students. So when it gets created, it's going to have all 4 of these sections. Then we'll click next again. So here's what it's going to look like for you as the teacher. And then here's what it'll look like for the student. And you'll see that those sections that we just created, each student is going to get one of those. And notice, of course, that the student will not see the teacher only section because only the teacher will see that. So then we're going to go ahead and click create. So your students will have 2 different ways. They can open it on OneNote Online, which I'll show because a lot of students I found do this instead of downloading the app. They'll use it here on the web. But you'll notice this is going to be basically the exact same interface. It's just here in their browser. Which is really nice, especially for students who maybe have an older computer or they have a Chromebook where there isn't an actual app. So they can view OneNote and use all these different tools online. Or you can click the Open OneNote, and actually, as long as you have the app installed, we'll open it here in the desktop application as well. Now, one option for this, similar to having kind of a shell or a template in Blackboard, is you can kind of functionally create the same thing in OneNote. So the class that I've been demonstrating here is with Geography 105. And this semester, this class is going to be taught by me and 3 other instructors. And so we've created a shared OneNote document that has kind of the course materials for the entire course. And now, as we need them, we can move and copy them into the new classroom notebook that we just created for this semester. So we've set this notebook has been set up where all 4 of our instructors can see it, and we can pick and pull and edit content from here and put it into our class notebook. Is there a gradebook in OneNote? So no, there's no gradebook in OneNote. So what I do is when I grade an assignment, and so like on this student, they got 4.75 out of 4. I immediately have the gradebook open in another window. I have 2 monitors, and I just type in their score then. The other thing is technically the student can come in here and they could change this. You know, they could say, oh, we're going to make it 12 out of 4. But because I record the score immediately, even if they change it, then it wouldn't matter. Another thing that I'll point out, and it looks like none of you have actually clicked through and done anything yet. But let's say that this student completed the homework. It's going to be what they call unread. And so their assignment, see how it turned in bold? So when I go through to do grading, I'm looking for students that are in bold, because bold tells me that they've added something to the document since the last time I viewed it. And so I know to grade things when those things are bolded. The other thing I do is I put this checkbox at the top that says I'm finished, ready for feedback and grading. And the reason I do this is the students don't have to click this box. But like I said before, my assignments are always due on Fridays at midnight. And I can get ahead on my grading if on Thursday morning I see that some students have finished. But if I see answers but they haven't checked this box, I don't grade it until after the deadline. But if they've indicated to me that I am finished, then I'll grade them in advance. So that could be something you could do, or you could not. But the most basic answer to your question is no. You do have to do the gradebook independently of OneNote. And so what I've done in my course is I just have the gradebook and Blackboard set up in advance, so that when I'm doing my grading, like I said, the column already exists. It's just up on the other monitor, and I can just put the grade in as I do it. And then another question, is the group of students now a team in Microsoft Teams? I don't have a perfect answer to that question. I want to say no. I know for a fact that the groups that I created here are not in Microsoft Teams. And I can show you how I created these groups. I'll show that before we break into the groups. I'll show how I did that. I do know that in Microsoft Teams, you can implement a classroom notebook within the team. That is not something that I've done. I do my synchronous sessions in Blackboard Collaborate, just like we're doing here. And one of the uses that I use the OneNote for, actually, is I create this page. And this is kind of a living document that every time I do a live session, I add a link to that recording in Blackboard. My students have told me that they find how to access the recordings in Blackboard to be kind of clunky. And so I created this page where I have, for every unit and every module, I just update the link after the recording is available. And my students are really good. If I forget to put a link here, I usually have an email later the same day asking about the link getting put in. So this is something that I also have used this content library part for. These groups that I created here, yeah, I actually have had this. I've had a similar struggle, Eric, with Teams. I've seen how to make like groups in Microsoft Teams, but I haven't seen how to actually create a team in Teams, if that makes sense. The groups that I have here, here is kind of my my motivation for these groups. So I want my students to have more collaboration student to student. And so in a face-to-face classroom where I used to teach, it was really easy to say, hey, get with the 3 or 4 people around you, and you're gonna brainstorm this topic and write your answers on this big sticky note, and then we're gonna like walk around the room and share out. Or I could give a group of students a blank map, and I could give them some data and some colored pencils, and they could work on creating a map representation of that data. What I wanted was to find some kind of way of kind of emulating that here, using OneNote as the platform of holding either the handout or kind of the virtual whiteboard. And so I created these teams that in my upcoming semester, my students are going to have the same team all throughout the semester. And every time we do a synchronous class, they're going to have some kind of graded assignment during that class with their team. This is going to be something that will make the synchronous sessions more engaging. I think it's also going to help build community by having a consistent team throughout the semester. They'll at least get to know 3 or 4 other people in the class. And so how I created these, if you are inside OneNote, you'll click this Manage Notebooks button. And this is going to pop you online to the kind of, I guess, the kind of the back-end configuration of your notebook. This is where if you want to add new sections, you can add new sections. The part that I'll show is this collaboration space. So you'll notice here these are the sections that you saw inside the collaboration space. Once it loads, which is taking a little bit. And so this question and answers page I have, which is similar to people who have done a question and answers discussion board in Blackboard, so students can post questions and other students can answer to them. This is available to everyone. Everyone that pre-registered can see this. And then I've made these other sections where I've specified which students are able to see that session. And you can see you get an option down here of if you want other people to be able to see the section or not. So right now this is turned on read-only access to all students. So these students are able to view group 1, and right now everybody is able to see it, which actually I didn't mean for it to be that way. So I could change that. So now only these students, when I click save, will be able to see that section. So again, that takes a little bit of legwork up front. If you wanted to do it, really simply, you could just click, okay, I want the first 5 names, and then I'll make a group, the next 5 names, make a group, so on and so forth, and you could create these individual sections for these groups of students.